The message had not arrived. It had not been delayed. It simply was not there. The phone rested face up on the table. Silent. No vibration. No light. Just a dark screen holding its place. He sat close enough to see it without leaning in. Far enough to avoid touching it. The distance felt measured. Intentional. The phone did not demand attention. It did not promise anything. It remained where it was. He returned to that position often. Not because it was comfortable, but because it required nothing from him. His hands rested loosely on his legs. Shoulders lowered. Breath even. Waiting had shaped itself into his routine. Not as an act, but as a condition. He checked the room instead of the screen, noticing familiar edges. The same quiet. The same light settling without urgency. Some people might have said he was patient. Others would have called him restrained. No one saw how deliberate the stillness had become. The phone marked the center of that stillness. A small object holding a large pause. He told himself messages arrived when they were meant to. That timing mattered. That rushing only distorted meaning. He did not refresh the screen. He did not lift the phone to confirm its silence. He trusted the quiet. Time moved around him in fragments. A sound passing outside the room. A shift in the light. Nothing stayed long enough to require response. There were moments when his posture leaned forward slightly, as if recognition had already begun, as if the message was forming somewhere unseen. Then the moment passed. The phone remained dark. So did he. He had learned that waiting softened outcomes. That expectations lost their edge when left untouched. That certainty, delayed long enough, felt less necessary. The phone supported that belief. It did not change. It did not mark how much time had passed since he first placed it there. From the outside, nothing appeared unfinished. The room looked settled, orderly, complete. From within, there was a quiet suspension. Not hope, not doubt, just the sense that something was being held open. And the assumption, never spoken, that it could remain that way a little longer. He stayed with the silence longer than he expected. Not by choosing it again, by letting it continue. The phone remained on the table, unchanged. It no longer felt temporary. It felt assigned. He adjusted his movements around it. Sat down the same way. Stood up without crossing its line of sight. The space between him and the screen became familiar. Nothing required explanation yet. That was part of the ease. He filled the time with small, repeatable actions. Straightening something that was already straight. Rinsing a cup that had not been used. Pausing near the table without looking down. The phone did not interrupt. It did not correct him. It allowed the day to arrange itself. He told himself that checking would change nothing. That if a message arrived, it would announce itself. That attention was unnecessary. The quiet supported that belief. Time passed without edges. Minutes softened into something less exact. The light shifted, then settled again. He noticed patterns instead of moments. How often his eyes passed over the phone without landing. How his body leaned forward slightly at certain intervals, then relaxed back. Waiting stopped feeling like a choice. It felt like posture. He had learned that patience looked responsible from the outside. That stillness suggested control. That not reaching implied confidence. The phone stayed dark. Its screen reflected nothing clearly enough to hold. There were times when his hand moved closer than before. Not to pick it up, just to be nearer. The distance between his fingers and the device became something he recognized. A measure he could maintain. He believed that staying ready mattered more than acting. That the message, when it came, would arrive complete. That meaning required the right moment. The phone did not disagree. The room remained calm. Nothing pressed him forward. Nothing pulled him away. From a distance, the scene would have looked settled. A person unhurried, unbothered. From within, something had begun to narrow. Not urgency, not concern, just the quiet sense that waiting was no longer opening time. It was shaping it. The quiet began to change its texture. Not louder. Not broken. Just less forgiving. The phone stayed where it was, but no longer felt neutral. Its stillness started to register. Not as absence, but as presence. He noticed it first in his body. The way sitting took more effort than before. The way standing felt like an unfinished thought. Moments passed closer now. Near enough to be felt. Not near enough to be taken. He found himself watching the screen more directly. Not checking it. Just acknowledging it. The dark surface reflected parts of the room at certain angles. A blur of light. A shape that could have been his hand. He did not recognize himself in it. The belief that waiting preserved meaning began to thin. He had trusted that time would keep things open. That silence held space rather than closing it. Now the silence felt specific. He became aware of how often his hand moved toward the phone and stopped. How the motion formed fully before dissolving. How many times he repeated that same incomplete action. The distance between his fingers and the screen felt smaller than before. Not because he moved closer, but because the gap had become familiar. He started to sense what the message represented beyond information. Not words. Not explanation. Confirmation. Something that would arrive and settle what he had been holding apart. He realized he had been waiting not for a message, but for permission. Permission to move forward without deciding what that meant. The phone offered none. He had assumed that waiting reduced risk. That delay softened consequence. That time, stretched long enough, made choices easier. Instead, time had been arranging them quietly, pushing some farther away, letting others lose definition. The moments he thought he was protecting no longer paused near him. They passed through without slowing, unaffected by his readiness. He understood then that the message had never been late. It was simply not coming. Not because it was withheld, but because waiting had never been part of its path. The clarity arrived without relief, without urgency. The phone remained dark, and for the first time, the silence felt complete. He did not reach for the phone. There was no moment that demanded it. No final signal. No closing sound. The phone remained on the table, exactly where it had been. Dark. Unchanged. The room felt thinner now. Not empty. Exposed. He stood where he often stood, near enough to see the screen clearly, far enough to keep his hands still. The posture that once felt prepared now felt fixed. He understood that nothing had been holding him there. No delay. No misunderstanding. Only repetition. Each time he chose to wait, it had felt temporary. Together, those moments had formed something solid. A structure built from restraint. The message he expected had never been part of that structure. It had not been delayed. It had not been withheld. It had simply moved on without passing through him. There was no relief in this understanding. No sudden urgency either. Just a quiet settling of what was already true. He saw that waiting had not protected anything. It had filtered things out. Moment by moment, the silence no longer felt open. It felt complete. His hand rested at his side. It did not lift. It did not hesitate. The phone offered no reflection worth studying now. Just a dark surface. A finished pause. Somewhere beyond a room. Communication continued. Messages were sent. They arrived where movement had already begun. He remained still, aware that the waiting was over. Not because something had arrived, but because there was nothing left to wait for. The phone stayed where it was. The room stayed quiet. And for the first time, he understood that the moment he had been holding open had already passed. There are things no one says out loud. Not because there is nothing to say, but because saying it might change everything. If this story feels familiar, perhaps you understand it better than most.